All right, we're in Job chapter 38, and we're going to finish up this morning. And this is the final examination. This is where God himself shows up. God's been there all along. Job I think he knew it intellectually, but I don't think he knew it in his heart. And certainly when God shows up, he extols his greatness, his creativity, his power, and his kindness and his mercy to other people. One of the things, too, that I think is important to remember, that obviously the entire book is about God and what he can do, what he does do. And I know it's something simple, but I don't know why. It just struck me yesterday that Satan is only at the very first part of this. He wrecks his calamity and does what he does, but then Satan's not there anymore. And it's just like he does in our world today, right? He shows up and he leaves a trail of disaster in his wake. But Satan never shows up again. God's going to ask Job 77 questions. And of course, Job can't answer any one of those particular questions. And it just shows the sovereignty of God, the magnificence of God, and who he is. And God addresses Job, and he summarizes it basically in three questions. First of all, can you explain my creation? Number two, can you oversee my creation? And number three, can you subdue my creation? So God keeps the discussion to a pretty tight window, if you will. He's not talking about everything that he does. He just says, hey, just look at my creation, and you tell me if you can do these things, because I can. And you can't. So this first question about explaining God's creation deals with God's power and his wisdom into bringing the universe into being. The second one about overseeing his creation deals with his providential care of his creatures. And the third question about subduing creation centers on two creatures, and they're given different names, but more than likely most commentators and scholars think this is the hippo and the crocodile, and we'll look at that in a little bit more detail. In the fact that those are two animals that humans have never been able to train, been able to catch them. You can catch a horse and train a horse, right? You can catch an elephant and train an elephant. But these two, no one has ever been able to do that. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. And when Job this finally dawns on him just how weak and ineffective he is. Throughout all this book, there's been a sense of his self-righteousness. And when he finally repents of that, God restores him and doubly blesses him. So this first question, can you explain my creation? Let's just read that chapter, or the first 38 verses. So this storm is coming, and God is in that particular storm. As we talked about last week, there's other places in the Bible where we see that word. In Ezekiel, when he has his vision, there's this storm he sees coming, and God is in that storm. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, "Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now gird up your loins like a man, and I will ask you, and you instruct me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who set its measurements, since you know? Or who stretched the line on it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Or who enclosed the sea with doors when bursting forth it went out from the womb, when I made a cloud its garment, thick darkness its swaddling band? And I placed boundaries on it, and I set a bolt and doors, and I said, thus far you shall come, but no farther, and here shall your proud waves stop. Have you ever in your life commanded the morning and caused the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth, and the wicked be shaken out of it? It is changed like clay under the seal, and they stand forth like a garment. And from the wicked their light is withheld, and the uplifted arm is broken. Have you entered into the springs of the sea, or have you walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been revealed to you, or have you seen the gates of deep darkness? Have you understood the expanse of the earth? Tell me if you know all of this. Where is the way to the dwelling of light? And darkness, where is its place, that you may take it to its territory, and that you may discern the paths to its home? You know, for you were born then, and the number of your days is great. Have you entered the storehouses of the snow, or have you seen the storehouses of the hail, which I have reserved for the time of distress, for the day of war and battle? Where is the way that the light is divided, or the east wind scattered on the earth? Who has cleft a channel for the flood, or a way for the thunderbolt, to bring rain on a land without people, on a desert without a man in it? To satisfy the waste and desolate land, and to make seeds of grass to sprout? Has the rain a father, or who's begotten the drops of dew? From whose womb has come the ice, and the frost of heaven, who has given it birth? Water becomes hard like stone, and the surface of the deep is imprisoned. Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades, or loose the cords of Orion? Can you lead forth a constellation in its season, and guide the bear with her satellites? Do you know the ordinances of the heavens, or fix their rule over the earth? Can you lift up your voice to the clouds, so that an abundance of water may cover you? Can you send forth lightnings, that they may go and say to you, here we are? Who has put wisdom in the innermost being, or has given understanding to the mind? Who can count the clouds by wisdom, or tip the water jars of the heavens? And when the dust hardens into a mass, and the clods stick together. He's throwing a lot here at Job, saying, when Job was giving his speeches, he was sure that his speeches had been given with wisdom and a lot of insight. But as soon as God begins to speak there in verse 2, that very first question puts an end to that particular delusion he has. And if you notice, God didn't question Job's integrity or his sincerity. He only questions his ability to explain the ways of God in the world. In verses 4 through 7, you see this creation of the earth. And God compares himself to a builder who surveys that site, who marks off the dimensions, pours the footings, lays the cornerstone, and erects the structure. And that's the creation that God has made. And he says that the creation was so wonderful that the stars and the angels all sang and shouted for joy. They thought it was absolutely beautiful. And Job, obviously, he wasn't there at the beginning. So how in the world could he know so much about the works of God? And then he moves to the seas in verses 8 through 11. And the image here isn't about building, but it's about birth, where he brings things out, where the seas were knit together in secret, and then they come forth like a baby from the womb. That's what he did with the waters. In verses 12 through 15, he's talking about the sun. Job, have you ever told the sun to rise and disperse the darkness? Have you ever told the sun when to set? And, as the light spreads across the world, it reveals the details of the landscape. But just like when God has told the ocean, you can come this far and you can't come any further than this. At the same time, during that sunrise, if you will, God has determined how the light's going to proceed and where the darkness goes. And God knows where all of that is. In verses 16 through 24, this is talking about the dimensions of creation. He talks about walking the depths of the sea or visiting the gates of Sheol. Job had no idea how deep the ocean's floor truly was. And obviously God did, for sure. When I Googled it, the greatest depth that's been measured was found in the Pacific Ocean, and it was 35,810 feet down. If you think about that, most airliners today will fly anywhere between 32 and 40,000 feet. And you might hear it on a day where the humidity is really low. I noticed yesterday being outside, I heard more airline traffic going overhead than I'd heard in a long time, but it was because the humidity was so low. But looking up and I couldn't see it, I couldn't find it. And that same distance, that's how deep the deepest part of the ocean is. That's almost 7 miles down. That is amazing that it's that deep. When we look at space, and obviously the dimensions are so great that I know for me, I can't wrap my head around it. When I see however many miles, it's just a number because I can't comprehend it. In 1989, we sent Voyager 2, I think it was, and it spent 12 miles going 4.4 billion miles. And within a short period of time after that, it passed within 3,000 miles of Neptune's cloud bank. And when you look at the order of planets and where we are at that, Neptune's far, certainly not the furthest, but it is amazing to me, and I just can't comprehend it. And that's just within our own solar system. And our own solar system is one of thousands within this particular galaxy. And this galaxy is one of thousands in the entire universe. And the thing that scientists can't explain and baffles them is that as they push the boundaries of discovery further out, what they're finding out is that the edge of the universe just keeps expanding. It just keeps going, which obviously suggests that there had to be a start, right? And we know that there was. God said that there was. But they can't understand, their minds can't comprehend how in the world could this all continue to go. And it's the continuing creative capacity, I guess you could say, of God, His continuous work. And it's astounding. You know, when they talk about putting people on Mars, you know, like with this Blue Origin thing where they go up and they come back down and it takes about 10 minutes and you're in space for just a few seconds, I think I could handle that. But when you're talking about years and billions of miles to get to Mars, and then once you're there, you're not coming back home. No thanks, I'm not interested in that particular thing. In verses 19 through 21, God asked Job if he could calculate the reaches of the east and the west, and obviously we can't because it's infinity. You'll never, you know, we've said this before, that if you start walking north, eventually you cross the North Pole and you're going south. You start walking east and you never change direction, you're always walking east. That is astounding when God says He's cast our sins as far as the east is from the west. How far is that? We can't measure that, but it's an astounding thing. In verses 22 and 23, he asked if Job understands where the hail and the snow is stored up. We think we have an idea how that comes to us, but who determines when and where and those kinds of things? And even the lightning in verse 24. And then you look at the wind and the way the wind currents operate and what can affect those, and it's so complex. And yet we know that God is in control of all of that stuff. And so he's asking Job, you know, explain the wind to me. And he can't. And I think when you get down to it today, we can explain the effects of wind, but where wind truly comes from, we have no idea. God is truly amazing. Verses 25 through 28, he's talking about rain here. You know, Job, can you tell the lightning where and when to flash? And obviously he can't. In 29 and 30, he's starting to talk about spring and autumn, and then on into winter as he talks about hail and frost. And you know, Job, if you don't understand how the rain came about, how are you going to understand how ice is actually born? You know, you got to be thinking during all of these questions that he can't answer. He's beginning to be humbled for sure. I can only imagine Job is sitting there and in his head saying, enough, enough, enough. But God doesn't stop. He just keeps on going. He talks about the heavens, the constellations. Ask Job, do you understand how these things all move together and how the various laws that I've put in place? And we know that there are different laws, natural laws that God has established that these particular things follow. You know, it's wonderful that we can study the heavens, that we can just be absolutely marveled by nature itself, but obviously man can't control any of that. But God does control all of that. In verse 33, that can be paraphrased, because some people will look at that and say that the stars and the planets have a direct influence over events. What is that called? Do you know? Some people look at it every day.
Astrology?
There you go. You know, if you're born at this particular time, here's what's going to happen to you today because this and this and this are all in these particular places. And that's not what this verse is describing. You can paraphrase it as, Job, if you understand so much about the heavenly bodies, then why don't you use that authority to change your situation? So if those things actually determine how your life's going to go, and you're so powerful and knowledgeable, why don't you change things up and make your circumstances better? And obviously Job can't do that. And this is one of those times that I think the Lord was being sarcastic to him. And Job certainly took the point. 34 through 38, he's calling attention to clouds. And says, you know, Job, since you know the laws of the heavens, you know, why don't you order the clouds to give some rain? Why don't you order up some lightning? Why don't you tip over the clouds so that the rain will actually come? What we see next is God moving into this next series of questions about his providence that we see in this world today. And so now he's going to move from inanimate objects all the way to the animate. Beginning in verse 39 and running through the end of chapter 39. Can you hunt the prey for the lion or satisfy the appetite of the young lions when they crouch in their dens and lie in wait in their lair? Who prepares for the raven its nourishment when its young cry to God and wander about without food? Do you know the time the mountain goats give birth? Do you observe the calving of the deer? Can you count the months they fulfill, or do you know the time they give birth? They kneel down, they bring forth their young, they get rid of their labor pains. Their offspring become strong, they grow up in the open field, they leave and do not return to them. Who sent out the wild donkey free? And who loosed the bonds of the swift donkey, to whom I gave the wilderness for a home and the salt land for his dwelling place? He scorns the tumult of the city, the shoutings of the driver he does not hear. He explores the mountains for his pasture, and he searches after every green thing. Will the wild ox consent to serve you, or will he spend the night at your manger? Can you bind the wild ox in the furrow with ropes, or will he harrow the valleys after you? Will you trust him because his strength is great and leave your labor to him? Will you have faith in him that he will return your grain and gather it from your threshing floor? The ostrich's wings flap joyously with the pinion and plumage of love, for she abandons her eggs to the earth and warms them in the dust. And she forgets that a foot may crush them or that a wild beast may trample them. She treats her young cruelly as if they were not hers. Though her labor be in vain, she is unconcerned. Because God has made her forget wisdom and has not given her a share of understanding. When she lifts herself on high, she laughs at the horse and his rider. Do you give the horse his might? Do you clothe his neck with the mane? Do you make him leap like the locust? His majestic snorting is terrible. He paws in the valley and rejoices in his strength. He goes out to meet the weapons. He laughs at fear and is not dismayed, and he does not turn back from the sword. The quiver rattles against him, the flashing spear and javelin. With shaking and rage, he races over the ground. He does not stand still at the voice of the trumpet. As often as the trumpet sounds, he says, "Aha!" And he scents the battle from afar, the thunder of the captains and the war cry. Is it by your understanding that the hawk soars, stretching his wings toward the south? Is it at your command that the eagle mounts up and makes his nest on high? On the cliffs he dwells and lodges, upon the rocky crag, an inaccessible place. From there he spies out food, his eyes see it from afar. His young ones also suck up blood, and where the slain are, there he is. So he's looking at 6 different beasts here, the lioness, the goat, the deer, wild donkey, wild ox, and horse. But he also talks about 5 different birds here: the raven, the ostrich, the stork, the hawk, and the eagle. And God's question to him is, do you understand these animals? Do you understand how to take care of them? Do you know how long their pregnancies are? Do you know when they're going to give birth? Do you know how they're going to provide the food for them? Tell me what you know, Job. And I think Job, like the rest of us, would just have to sit there with our mouth shut. Because certainly we didn't. And don't know how many of these animals live, and certainly how to take care of them. That's something that we're not able to do. Psalm 145:16 says, "You open your hand and satisfy the desire of every living thing." God supervises his universe. He cares for his creation. He provides for his creation. And I don't know about you, but for me, just for my daily life, keeping that machine running, that keeps my hands full. You pile in the universe on top of that, and I'm lost, right? And I think that's true for all of us. Verses 39 and 41, he asked him about, do you know how to feed the lion cubs or the young ravens? And if you could feed them, how would you even know that they're hungry? God knows those things. And then he goes to the subject of birth, chapter 39, where he asks, how long is the pregnancy period, and when do they give birth, and how long are they supposed to stay with mom before they actually leave? Shepherds and farmers, in our domesticated animals, we got good ideas when things are going to happen, but these wild animals, and we provide for them, but these wild animals don't have any humans to care for them, and yet God takes care of them. In verses 5 through 8, he's talking about a wild donkey that just refuses to be domesticated. It survives without any human assistance because God taught the donkey how to take care of itself. God took care of it. And another one, he says the same thing about the wild ox. You can't capture him. You can't keep him in your barn. You can't plow behind him. He's not going to thresh your wheat. So what do you know about it? Then he turns to this description of 2 birds. The stork, which we think is a peacock, and then the ostrich. And he didn't ask him any questions about these 2 birds. He just reminds him of their bizarre anatomy, if you will, and trying to get him to see and understand. The ostrich is a bird. I think it's only one of 2 birds in the world that doesn't fly, but it has wings. And the other thing about an ostrich is when it lays its eggs, it just lays them flat on the ground. And then when the eggs hatch, very shortly thereafter, she's chasing them off. It's like she doesn't want to deal with them anymore. But yet the ostrich can actually outrun a horse. It's that fast. And then the peacock, of course, for me, I see a picture of a peacock or I see a video of a peacock and I think, what an amazing bird. Absolutely beautiful. What's it for? I don't know. Right? You know what a chicken's for. I look at an ostrich and I go, what's it for? And just for our pleasure and benefit, I think, something for us to enjoy. In verses 19 through 25, he's talking about a horse, which at that time, and even now, was greatly admired and valued for its strength, and at that time for its courage. And this is a description of a war horse. This isn't a farm horse. This is a war horse, bred to go into battle. And when he first hears that trumpet that the battle's about to start, he cannot stand still. He's ready to go. And God asked him, who made that horse and who gave him its abilities, and what do you know about that, Job? And of course, once again, he can't answer. And then he ends this section talking about 2 birds, the hawk and the eagle. Job, who gave those birds the knowledge to create their nest? Who gave those birds the knowledge of when to migrate? We see, like in the fall, or even in the spring, It's one of my favorite events to watch for when the geese are flying over in that V formation, right? Because you know either winter's on the way or you know spring is on the way. But who told those birds when they get up and do that? Can you imagine one day they're out in the field eating, minding their own business, and then all of a sudden they take off, get in this V formation, and they're migrating. Who gave them that knowledge? Of course, that's something we can say that God did it, but we can't understand how they do that or why they do that. In chapter 40, we see one of the first responses from Job in verses 1 through 5. Then the Lord said to Job, "Will the fault finder contend with the Almighty? Let him who reproves God answer it." Then Job answered the Lord and said, "Behold, I am insignificant. What can I reply to you? I lay my hand on my mouth. Once I have spoken, and I will not answer. Even twice, and I will add no more." Job, I just presented my case to you. What do you have to say? Job says, I got nothing to say. I have absolutely nothing. He just calls himself vile. But he's not yet quite at that place where God wants him, that place of brokenness and sincere repentance. And so God's going to continue with his questioning, where he looks at, can you subdue my creation, beginning in verse 6 of chapter 40. Then the Lord answered Job out of the storm and said, "Now gird up your loins like a man. I will ask you, and you instruct me. Will you really annul my judgment? Will you condemn me that you may be justified? Or do you have an arm like God, and can you thunder with a voice like his? Adorn yourself with eminence and dignity, and clothe yourself with honor and majesty. Pour out the overflowings of your anger, and look on everyone who is proud and make him low. Look on everyone who is proud and humble him, and tread down the wicked where they stand. Hide them in the dust together, bind them in the hidden place, then I will also confess to you that your own right hand can save you. And behold now, Behemoth, which I have made as well as you, he eats grass like an ox. Behold now, his strength is in his loins, and his power in the muscles of his belly. He bends his tail like a cedar, the sinews of his thigh are knit together. His bones are tubes of bronze, his limbs are like bars of iron. He's the first of the ways of God, let his maker bring near his sword. Surely the mountains bring him food, and all the beasts of the field play there. Under the lotus plants he lies down. In the covert of the reeds and the marsh, the lotus plants cover him with shade. The willows of the brook surround him. If a river rages, he's not alarmed. He's confident, though the Jordan rushes to his mouth. Can anyone capture him when he is on watch with barbs? Can anyone pierce his nose? Can you draw out Leviathan with a fishhook, or press down his tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in his nose, or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make many supplications to you, or will he speak to you soft words? Will he make a covenant with you? Will you take him for a servant forever? Will you play with him as with a bird? Will you bind him for your maidens? Will the traders bargain over him? Will they divide him among the merchants? Can you fill his skin with harpoons, or his head with fishing spears? Lay your hand on him. Remember the battle. You will not do it again. Behold, your expectation is false. Will you be laid low even at the sight of him? No one is so fierce that he dares to arouse him. Who then is he that can stand before me? Who is given to me that I should repay him? Whatever is under the whole heaven is mine. I will not keep silence concerning his limbs, or his mighty strength, or his orderly frame. Who can strip off his outer armor? Who can come within his double mail? Who can open the doors of his face? Around his teeth there is terror. His strong scales are his pride, shut up as with a tight seal. One is so near to another that no air can come between them. They are joined one to another, they clasp each other and cannot be separated. His sneeze flashes forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning torches, sparks of fire leap forth. Out of his nostrils smoke goes forth. As from a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and a flame goes forth from his mouth. In his neck lodges strength, and dismay leaps before him. The folds of his flesh are joined together, firm on him and immovable. His heart is as hard as a stone, even as hard as a lower millstone. When he raises himself up, the mighty fear, because of the crashing they are bewildered. The sword that reaches him cannot avail, nor the spear, the dart, or the javelin. He regards iron as straw, bronze as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. Sling stones are turned into stubble for him. Clubs are regarded as stubble. He laughs at the rattling of the javelin. His underparts are like sharp potsherds. He spreads out like a threshing sledge on the mire. He makes the depths boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a jar of ointment. behind him he makes a wake to shine. One would think the deep to be gray hair. Nothing on earth is like him, one made without fear. He looks on everything that is high. He is king over all the sons of pride. So when he's talking here about subduing, this is where most scholars think the first animal that he's talking about is a hippopotamus. And this is an astounding statistics because we've seen so much on TV about the crocodiles in Africa and just how vicious that they are. But the hippopotamus is responsible for more deaths anywhere else in the world than any other animal. And they are incredibly ferocious animals, extremely territorial. There was a professional bow hunter. He had a TV show when I was watching it. He'd gone to Africa and they were hunting, I don't know, something big with a bow and arrow. And one of the guides gets a radio call. And of course, it's in their native tongue. He doesn't speak it. And he says, "Is everything all right?" And he looks at him and he says, "Do you want a chance to kill a hippo?" And he said, "Are you serious?" He said, "Absolutely." Apparently there was this hippopotamus that had killed one or two villagers in this area already, and they were going to eliminate this hippo. So it's the hunter, it's the guide, and it's two other guys in a canoe. And they get into the water and they spot this thing from a ways off. And they slowly paddle up, but they got to be careful because he's very territorial. And so, of course, you see his head. And right as the hippo starts to dive down into the water, he gets a shot off and hits the hippo. And these things can stay in the water for an incredible amount of time, holding the breath. And so he's down for a long time. And finally, the two guys in the back of the boat, they start to argue. And the hunter asks the guide, he says, "What are they arguing about?" He said, "They're arguing over who has to go down to check to see if that hippo's dead." Because neither one of them wanted to do it. And finally it was dead. They brought it up, gave it to the village, and provided food for a considerable period of time. These things, hippos are just absolutely amazing. In verse 15 of chapter 40, God reminds Job that he's the creator of both the hippo and the man, and yet he made them very differently. In chapter 41, this word Leviathan is a transliteration of a Hebrew word which means to twist or to writhe. And so that's why we think he may be describing a crocodile here. And that's one animal that we see people capture them. You can't train it. You sure wouldn't want to keep it. It's just a fierce, fierce thing. So God describes these animals. He describes what they're able to do, and then asks Job, can you subdue them? Because I can't. And Job in chapter 42, the first 6 verses, he gives his second response to this. Then Job answered the Lord and said, "I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have declared that which I did not understand, things too wonderful for me which I did not know. Hear now, and I will speak. I will ask you, and do you instruct me. I've heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I retract and I repent in dust and ashes." Finally, Job is beaten. He's learned his lesson, and he's at that point there where God really wants him to be. Job realizes he can't argue his case with God. Basically, he tells him, I can't answer your questions. All I can do is confess my pride, humiliate myself, and repent. Up to this point, Job's knowledge of God had been very impersonal. And now he's had this face-to-face, if you will, with God, and he knows exactly who he is. And when he sees God and sees himself in light of God, he understands that he's nothing. He's nothing but a creature. And God is very kind to take care of him. What we see too here is at the end of this, where Job goes to God on behalf of his friends. All along Job had been asking for this umpire, this mediator, this interceder between him and God. And here at the end of the book, we see this beautiful picture of Jesus Christ, where now Job has become the mediator between God and his friends. And so, only God could work something like that, I think. It's quite amazing. Because of that, because he forgave his friends, because he prayed for them, then Job's work, I guess you could say, was done. God blesses him again. When you look at all total, God blesses him with 10 more children. God bless his wife. She's had 20 kids now. And obviously then he gives him livestock back, but double what he had before. He's restored him to his place of prestige within the community now. People that wouldn't go talk to him anymore, now they come to him. And I can't help but think that his spiritual maturity level had just gone through the roof, if you will. He's been through the fire. He understands what this is. If you look at this double formula, and maybe it applies, maybe it doesn't. We know that Job died at the age of 140. So if that's the case, when he went through all of this trial and suffering, he was 70 years old. Sometimes we think of, and I'd always thought of Job as more of a younger man, but he's somewhat older. He has 3 beautiful daughters, and then we see this phrase at the end of it that Job was old and full of years, and that means that he had died. But that is the goal of every person. It means more than just a long life. It means a long, full, rich life. And I think that's what we all would like to have. One of the things, in looking at the story of Job, too often I think, certainly his friends had this particular idea of a particular spiritual equation, if you will. And their equation was, if you're living right, or if you live right, then God's going to bless you. And if you live wrong, God's going to punish you. Is that true? Or, I'll find it here. Or, for the believer, is it true that because of Jesus' moral living on our behalf and taking our punishment for him, taking our punishment upon him, then we are given God's undeserved blessing? One of the things that God will use suffering for is to bring a person closer to him. And I don't know about you, but in times, and not always, but especially recently, but in times where I'm suffering or going through something, I'm getting better at it. But my first question isn't why. The first question is, what do you want me to know, and how do you want me to learn this? And I think that's very important. And I think Job was at that point at the end of his life. Any questions or comments?